I have three daughters, ages 13, 11, and 8. And my youngest daughter, she was 4 at the time, I was dropping her off at preschool. And it was January 2019. And as I was dropping her off, her teachers, and my other 2 daughters had these same teachers, so the teachers were familiar with me, I was familiar with them. They knew I taught history, they knew I taught civil rights history. They stopped me, and they said, Hassan, in a couple of days we are going to have the school-wide King Day Assembly. And we're going to bring the kids, her class, my daughter's class, of 4 and 5-year-olds. We're going to bring them to the assembly. We've done it before in the past, but, they don't quite get it. And so before we bring them, we want to sit down and talk to them about Dr. King. I said, well, that's a good idea. And they said, but we want you to talk to him. I said, no, that's a bad idea. I said, I love my daughter, but I'm afraid of 4-year-olds. They asked too many questions, and they thought I was joking. I was dead serious. And then they said, well, they really need you to come, and maybe this will lessen your anxiety. They said that we asked the girls, this is all girls school, and we asked the girls, to tell us something about Dr. King, and one of the girls said, well, we know he was killed. I said, well, that's good. But another girl said, but wasn't he killed by dragons? And I didn't quite understand it. She didn't quite understand. Kings are killed by dragons. And so the association out of context was Dr. King had been slayed by a dragon. Now, somehow this is supposed to make me feel more comfortable about going in and talking to these 4-year-olds. But I relented and I said, certainly I will. I'll come in and I'll come talk to the kids. So on the appointed day, I came in, and how do you talk to 4-year-olds about Dr. King? And so I thought about it in the days leading up, and I decided, I said, well, let me go in and talk about Dr. King as a young boy, a young child growing up in Jim Crow, Georgia, in segregated Georgia. Talk about the things that he wished he could do but could not do. The places he wished he could go but could not go. They can relate to that. And then I shifted after talking about that for just 2 or 3 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes to talking about King in 1963. Because in 1963, Dr. King leads the Birmingham Crusade, which is animated by the presence of children, the Children's Crusade. And we've all seen the images of children marching in the streets with Dr. King and going to jail by the thousands. And once I got through that, I took a deep breath and I asked, do you have any questions? And then the questions started to come. When I talked about the kids going to jail and water hoses being turned on them and dogs being turned on these children, one of the little girls asked, well, where were the police?
They were the ones.
Police were the ones turning the dogs on the children. Another child asked, were any of the children, they knew Dr. King had been killed, and we straightened that out. They said, were any of the children killed? I said, no. While they were marching, none of the children were. They had a number of other pointed questions, and we got through, and then we were done, and I gave my daughter a kiss, and I ran out the door. Mission accomplished. That afternoon, after I picked them up and we were driving home, my daughter didn't say much about the evening, about my visit. That evening, she didn't say much. That night, and I mean that night, about 11:30 at night, because that child never slept. She still don't sleep. Other two daughters are fast asleep. Layla's up. I'm walking around trying to get laundry, trying to convince her to go to bed. And she's in full filibuster mode. She's in full filibuster mode. And so finally I said, listen, you have to go to sleep. You have school in the morning. And she said, well, Dad, let's talk about Dr. King. I said, damn it. All right, you got 5 minutes. And so she starts to share what she remembered from the day, what she took away from the day. And Dr. King grew up in Georgia. Yeah, exactly. And he couldn't go to this because of this thing called Jim Crow. All right, you're good. And then she got to the point where she talked about 1963 and what she had learned. And she said, and there were children who marched with Dr. King. I said, that's correct. And she said, but some went to jail, but none were killed. And when I heard her say that, I realized in that moment that I had misspoken.
There you go.
Because while it was true that none of the children were killed while they were marching, September of 1963, 60 years ago, 4 little girls and 2 little boys were murdered.
There you go.
Because of the participation of young people in the civil rights movement. And I told her, I said, dear, I made a mistake. There were 4 girls who died. And she stopped. She looked at me and she said, laying in my bed. She said, well, what were their names? And I began to recall them, Addie Mae Collins, Carol Roberts. And I said, you know what? Give me my phone, because she had her phone. I said, give me my phone. I'll Google their pictures for you. And so I pulled up the pictures. The ones that we've all seen, the yearbook pictures, the grainy black and white ones. And as she was looking through the pictures, she looked at one and said, that looks like Asha, her older sister. Mm-hmm. She was making a human connection to a black and white picture of a girl who died in the struggle for freedom. And we talked a little bit more, and finally I could see her eyes were getting heavy. And so I said, you can go to sleep here and I'll move you to your room after. And she laid her head down and I walked around the room for a little bit, a couple of minutes, and I started to tiptoe out of the room. I looked at her and she seemed to be fast asleep already. And without opening her eyes, she said, I think he was trying to say America was damaged.
Teach now.
I said, what? She said, I think, didn't open her eyes. Said it again. I think he was trying to say America was damaged. I had never heard her use the word damaged before. I said, damaged? She said, damaged. And I said, who? She said, Dr. King. And then she was off to sleep. Now, I had been studying at that point civil rights history for 25 years.
Never studied like that.
I had never been able to so concisely and precisely say what Dr. King was trying to tell us. And yet after spending 15 minutes in the classroom of 4-year-olds, this 4-year-old was able to sum it up. At a time in which we are talking about and pretending as though children somehow feel shame and blame when they are confronted with historical truths. It is never too young to teach a child the truth about the past or the present.
Said it. Woo!
My daughter was absolutely correct. Dr. King provided us with an honest critique of American society. He told us, he was trying to tell us that it was damaged.
Hold this for me for a few minutes.
Damaged because of racism, damaged because of
Might get you to hold this
militarism.
for a
Dr.
few
King said it was damaged because of capitalism. But he didn't leave it there. He also offered us a blueprint for fixing the damage. In 1963, that same 1963, when he's in Birmingham, Alabama, when he's locked up and thrown into the Birmingham jail, and he writes that letter from a Birmingham jail, he writes, in a real sense, Dr. King says, all life is interrelated. All people, all men, all women are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. What is Dr. King talking about? Dr. King is talking about thriving together. And he argues that it's not just possible to thrive together. He actually argues that it's absolutely necessary that we thrive together. Every year, of course, the NAACP chooses a theme. And this year, the NAACP chose this as its theme, thriving together. And in doing so, it chose to emphasize the necessity of us prospering as one. Not separately, but as one. But history is a powerful teacher. And African American history in particular. And African American history teaches us that it is nearly impossible to focus on thriving when all of your energy is focused on surviving.
Woo! Yeah. I say.
For 250 years, African Americans were held in bondage. And we were just trying to survive.
There you go.
To keep safe, to keep family together, to escape bondage, to go back into bondage to free others. We were trying to survive. But even in those dark days, enslaved folk figured out what was needed to thrive. Now, some say that that's impossible. Enslaved folk couldn't have been thinking about freedom in that sense, thinking about what it would take to thrive in a free society. Those who say that don't take black people seriously as political thinkers.
Woo! Teach now.
They don't take enslaved people seriously as political thinkers. They don't take working class, everyday, ordinary black folk today seriously as political thinkers.
No, they don't.
Enslaved folk understood what it meant to be free. Nobody had a better understanding of what freedom was than those who were denied the basic civil rights and human rights of free people and yet living in the presence of people who enjoyed it. Period. If you want to know what freedom was, all you have to do is ask a formerly enslaved person. They will tell you.
Teach now.
And there will be those who will say, well, you can't trust what they wrote. That's fine. Look at what they did.
Woo!
At the moment of emancipation, sometimes in the classroom we get to the point of slavery ending and we just jump forward in time. We don't spend enough time at that moment of emancipation. Because that's critical. Because that's the moment when black folk had the space to act on their freedom dreams. For the first time in a collective way. The 4 million who come out of slavery. And what do? They immediately begin to try to acquire land.
There you go.
Because they understand the importance of economic security. They immediately begin to petition for access to education. Because they understand the value of knowing the reading right. Creating and creating in the South for the first time a public education system. Creating historically black colleges and universities. They understand the power of the vote. In 1867, when the Reconstruction Acts are passed, granting African American men the right to vote, thousands in county after county registered to vote. These are folk who 2 years earlier were enslaved. Black men had to vote, but you better be sure that they had to vote right or they couldn't go home. This was a community vote. It would be another 60 years before black women had to vote, but they were already participating in the political process.
Say that.
And they also formed their own churches. The actions of black folk tell us they had an understanding of what freedom ought to look like. The actions of black folk tell us they had a vision and conceptualization of what it meant to thrive together. And one of the first things that they do is they form their own churches because they understood the power of social autonomy.
There you go.
They separate,
There you go.
move out of those white churches that they were forced to attend.
Teach now.
The most dangerous place for a black person in the South in 1865 was in the presence of white people. The most dangerous place for a black person in 1965 was in the presence of white people.
Woo!
And we'll get to the present in a second.
Say that now. Teach.
So they leave these white churches. But they did take one white member with them. That was that white Jesus. But that's a story.
Woo! Woo!
You might have to circle back to that another Freedom Fund dinner.
Oh, yeah. There you go. I told you, baby.
Now, some people would say that
Teach now.
in this moment of emancipation where African Americans are finally able to actualize some of their freedom dreams, that means that black people from this point forward could focus solely on thriving. And the answer, of course, is no. Because the window of opportunity slammed shut within a few years. One of the great myths that we are burdened with as Americans is the myth of perpetual racial progress. This idea that things may have been bad once, but somehow they always get better. There was slavery, but then there was freedom. There was Jim Crow, and not quite sure what that is, but you got Dr. Martin Luther King, and he got a birthday now.
Teach now.
And then, of course, there's Barack Obama and Beyonce and Gianna, so we good now.
Yeah.
But that window slammed shut within a few years. And Jim Crow rises. And Jim Crow wasn't just an unfortunate inconvenience. It wasn't just unfortunate that black people couldn't ride in front of the bus or wherever they wanted to. Jim Crow was an economic system.
Yes.
Designed to replace the labor controls that were lost when the institution of slavery was abolished.
Capitalism.
Some say that we shouldn't be talking about slavery, but we have to be talking about slavery into the new era because the principal legacy of slavery was white supremacy. We ended slavery, but we didn't end white supremacy.
Woo! Teach now.
We ended slavery, but we didn't end an enslaver's mentality, which was telling these white folks in the South that somehow they were entitled to control the labor of black folk. And then white folk outside the South granting sanction and signing off on it. And this new economic system is accompanied by political disenfranchisement. Between 1890 and 1910, every state in the former Confederacy rewrite their state constitutions for the sole purpose of taking the vote away from African Americans. And we're still living with the legacy of that. Felony disenfranchisement is put into law during this period for the sole purpose of taking the vote away from African Americans.
Teach now. Teach.
And of course, it's not just confined to the South, it spreads.
That's what I'm talking about.
Because white supremacy isn't just a Southern thing.
Oh. Woo. No, it's not.
Now, in Ohio, the good students that I get to teach at The Ohio State University, they suffer from what I call Underground Railroaditis.
Woo!
They've all been taught about the Underground Railroad. They've all been taught in Ohio that Ohio, of course, comes into the Union as a free state. There's no slavery there.
For who?
And so when I asked them about sort of racism and white supremacy, they said, oh no, Dr. Jeffries, slavery happened down there. We were on the right side of history. And I tell them, I say, well, yes, in fact, you are on the right side of history, but for the wrong damn reasons.
Woo!
The reason why there was no slavery up here is because the white folk up here did not want black folk up here. They did not want them up here as enslaved folk, and they did not want them here as free folk. If you were a black person moving into these territories, in many of the newly formed states, you had to pay several $100s bond against your future criminality.
Teach now. Woo!
From the beginning. Because racism and its belief in white supremacy wasn't a local thing. It wasn't a regional thing. It was a national thing. And accompanying political disenfranchisement, accompanying economic exploitation at the turn of the 20th century, of course, is extreme racial terrorism. Lynching.
Call it.
The kind of violence that we have never seen before.
Call it.
2 to 3 African Americans being publicly murdered somewhere in the United States every week.
Teach now. Teach.
But a funny thing happens with segregation, with Jim Crow, is that black folks said, okay, we're going to find a way. We're still going to fight for our most basic civil rights and human rights. In 1909, the formation of the NAACP. In 1924, the formation of the Milwaukee branch of the NAACP. We are still going to fight for our basic civil rights and human rights. And some of us, during the depths of Jim Crow, are going to be on the move. We're going to move out of the South to the North and to the Midwest. Find our way to Chicago or to Milwaukee. Some of us are going to leave the country. Even larger than the NAACP in the late 19-teens was the Universal Negro Improvement Association, Marcus Garvey's organization. They said there ain't no hope for us here. We got to go back to Africa. Black folk on the move. But the rest of us planted our feet on solid ground and said, we are going to build. We are still trying to survive, but we're going to carve out some space to thrive and thrive together. We're going to build black schools and black hospitals. We're going to build black businesses, banks, beauty shops, barber salons, grocery stores, pharmacies, funeral parlors. We're going to build our own transportation networks. And with Jim Crow out of public transportation, we're going to build black culture with churches and jazz clubs. And we're going to name it. We're going to name these communities Bronzeville. And there's one in Columbus, Ohio. And there's one in Chicago. And there's one right here in Milwaukee, West Walnut Street. Thriving together despite it all. But this is some of that hard history that people don't want to deal with. That in the long history of race relations in America, white folk have been threatened by black people thriving.
Woo! All day long and night.
And so we see them rampaging through black communities in 1919. Red Summer. We see them burning black communities. 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street. Not the only one, but one of many that is destroyed. Black thriving is a threat to white supremacy. And if that wasn't enough to destroy black communities, to break up black communities, to stop black thriving, then these same black communities were bulldozed in the 1950s and 1960s in the name of progress. For freeways and urban renewal. You know about that. Marquette Interchange and I-43.
Yes. Taste now.
Community after community after community. But black folk had a response. Because black folk have always had a response. One of the core characteristics of the African American experience is the persistence of resistance.
That's it.
There is never a time when black folk haven't been fighting for their basic civil rights and human rights. Never.
Never, ever.
And so how did they respond? Well, in Lowndes County, Alabama, this county in between Selma and Montgomery, that's 80% African American in 1965, and has 0 registered black voters. I mean, political exclusion was absolute because of the history of racial terrorism.
There you go.
That people knew that if they attempted to register to vote, they just simply wouldn't be turned away. They would be killed.
There you go.
And yet at the start of 1965, a small group of local people, not Dr. King, a small group of local people partnered with young activists from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And they managed not only to register a majority of African Americans within the next 18 months, but they create their own independent political party, the Lowndes County Freedom Party. And they choose as their ballot symbol a snarling Black Panther. This is the first Black Panther Party. That's what that story is about. This is the story of the first Black Panther Party, the story of the birth of Black Power.
That's right. Nice.
Born in a county where the average education was the 6th grade. And yet they were able to conceive and conceptualize of democracy in a way that had never existed in America before. They run a series of candidates for a local office. They said, we're going to take over the county courthouse. And so they run candidates for county school board. We need some good school board candidates today.
Yeah.
Candidates for candidates for sheriff and county coroner, and tax assessor, and tax collector. And I remember when I was doing this research, and I was like, I'm looking for this revolutionary movement, the birth of Black power, because people are running somebody for tax assessor. I was like, how is that revolutionary? How is that radical? That's the tax assessor. Well, you know who they ran for tax assessor? A sister by the name of Alice Moore, 42 years old. And Alice Moore, who was active in a local church and active in a local community, she throws her hat in to be the Black Panther candidate for tax assessor. And when they would have these mass meetings and call up the candidates to speak before the people, they would always ask everyone to give a speech, and folk would give good speeches. And they would ask Alice Moore to come up and give a speech, and Alice Moore every single time would come up and simply say, my platform is tax the rich to feed the poor. Woo! And then she'd sit down.
Thanks, now.
I'm still waiting for Joe Biden to say that.
Said it! Me too.
Taking everyday Black folks seriously as political thinkers. I mean, that's radical. That's small d democratic. We need a lot more of that today.
Yes, we do. Teach now.
Not from us with the PhDs,
Yeah.
but from the folk who have the experience on the ground.
Woo! Yes.
This last word. At the end of the documentary, and I hope many of you will get a chance to check it out. It's on NBC Peacock and local streaming services. But at the end of the documentary, a SNCC veteran, SNCC activist by the name of Ruby Sales, and she was one of the people who helped organize in Lowndes County, Alabama. She's the last person you hear from in the documentary film. And she says a lot in a short amount of time. She says, and I quote, there is a danger when you allow people to rewrite your movement story and to tell you what you were struggling for. Don't tell us what we're fighting for.
Taste now.
Don't tell us how we should define freedom and equality and what social justice is. And she goes on to say, and she's reflecting on the experiences that she had some 60 years earlier in Lowndes County, Alabama. She says, we had not asked the fundamental question, what does it mean to be free? We thought freedom meant the right to live like white people. We thought that freedom meant the right to live like white people and we did not seriously consider what did it mean to integrate into a burning house.
Woo! Yeah. True. For you that led my people into a burning fire.
What does it mean to integrate into a burning house? To move into a house that is on fire and not seek to put the fire out.
See that? That part.
When we're dealing with questions of racism and white supremacy, this isn't just about individual bad behavior. This is about stuff that is baked into the systems and structures of our society.
That part.
What does it look like to integrate into a burning house? It's what we saw in Memphis, Tennessee, earlier this year. When those black police officers, college educated, killed that young man. I submit that the house we are all living in today is on fire.
Oh.
It's a 4-alarm fire. And it's not an accidental fire. It's caused by arsonists. Arsonists who don't believe in voting rights. Arsonists who don't believe in a living wage. Arsonists who don't believe in reproductive rights. Arsonists who don't believe in equal justice under the law. Arsonists who don't believe in science. Arsonists who don't believe in an honest education.
Woo!
We are no longer, and perhaps never were, but it's certainly clear now, dealing with people who simply disagree with us on policies. We are dealing with people who disagree with us on democracy.
Woo!
The house we are living in is on fire.
Yes.
It is damaged. And if we don't put that fire out, we are all going to burn up. These are the stakes. These are the stakes. We either thrive together or we die together. That's where we are. But there is some good news. I know some firefighters right here in Milwaukee. I know a station house number 3254, located on 2754 North MLK Drive, Suite 202. And if you go there, visit the fire chief, Clarence Nichols, because he got some work for you. There's some buckets to get in line in the brigade to help put the fire out. It's all hands on deck, because the fire isn't just contained in Milwaukee. The fire isn't just contained in the Midwest. The fire isn't just contained in America. Dr. King talked about a global house.
Yes.
A global house is on fire.
Yes, it is.
But the NAACP has stood in the breach in Milwaukee for 99 years, holding the line, battling the blaze, and they will continue to do so. And it is our responsibility to stand with them, to fight alongside them, to be firefighters as well. And if we do that, we will not only survive, but we will thrive. Thank you very much.